it's Rachel, and I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite heroes, Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan, a British Puritan, and he was from a family of wealthy farmers, but eventually he became ruler of his country and guided his country through a really turbulent time of civil war. So I'm going to give you 20 points on how Oliver Cromwell fits into Joseph Campbell's hero motif. Okay, number 1, call to adventure. Oliver Cromwell was called to serve his country by the events that were taking place during his time in Parliament. Number 2, refusal of the call. Cromwell never set out to be the ruler of England. In fact, he often spoke of his preference for his old life. He said, "I would have been glad to have lived under my woodside and to have kept a flock of sheep, rather than to have undertaken this government. And you drew me here to accept the place I now stand in. There is ne'er a man within these walls that can say, sir, you sought it. Nay, not a man nor woman treading on English ground." Cromwell is saying that his position of authority was forced on him. He was only doing his duty. He did not necessarily have political ambition. Number 3, answering the call. What motivated Cromwell to answer the call? Well, he saw his own country and his own church and faith being destroyed by his own king. Mr. Joe Morecraft says in the first of his lecture on Cromwell, "Cromwell and his friends in Parliament realized something new and more drastic would have to be done to protect Protestantism and the liberties of Englishmen. When everything seemed to announce to the Protestants of England that soon they would either be trampled down by popery or massacred by the sword, these godly and serious men like Cromwell arose, called upon the king to change his mind and not to deceive the people. But when they found that their own king was deaf to the requests and arrogant and deceptive, raising troops to overhaul the Parliament, these godly men resolved in a spirit of prayer and devotedness, with God's assistance, to save the country and their faith, and so they left their homes and exposed themselves to death to stand against the king." Point number 4, supernatural aid. Campbell's hero motif also includes supernatural aid. Cromwell realized that his help came from God. In a letter to one of the colonels in the parliamentary army, Cromwell wrote, "Truly England and the Church of God hath had a great favor from the Lord in this great victory given us." His victory only came through God's power. Point number 5, guide or mentor. Cromwell looked to God as the only one to guide him. Before the key battle of Naseby, Cromwell said to his men, "I could not, riding out alone about my business, but smile out to God in praises, in assurance of victory, because God would, by things that are not, bring to naught things that are." Number 6, the talisman. Cromwell's talisman was his faith. It was a legitimate factor in his success. In his letters, he often speaks of how everything he does is only because God gave him the power. Number 7, companions. Cromwell was not the only one who stood up to the king. He and all the members of the Long Parliament, which is the parliament that decided to take a stand, all stood together in their efforts. Mr. Joe Morecraft says, "All of the great machinery by which tyranny was advanced in England was being dismantled by the Long Parliament, and Cromwell was in that parliament." Point number 8, crossing the threshold. There are several times in Cromwell's career that could be called the crossing the threshold. By the time of the Battle of Marston Moor in July of 1644, Cromwell had risen to the rank of Lieutenant General of Horse in Manchester's army, and this is where he began to show his military prowess. Later, Cromwell formed his famous force called the New Model Army. He required his soldiers to be devout Christians, and he used common men as his officers if he saw they had a talent for leadership, which was unheard of before. At the critical Battle of Naseby in June of 1645, the New Model Army smashed the King's major army. Cromwell led his wing with great success at Naseby, again routing the Royalist cavalry. This is another crossing the threshold moment. Threshold guardians. Many of the nobles rallied to the side of the king and formed an armed force against Cromwell and the rest of Parliament, so they sort of were guarding the threshold that Cromwell wanted to pass with his side of the Civil War. Number 10, road of trials. Cromwell's trials began with the persecution of the Protestant church by King Charles. Cromwell was outraged by the murder of so many of his Christian brothers. However, even after Cromwell and Parliament came to power, his trials didn't stop. He and his legendary model army were often called to put down uprisings, most famously in Ireland and Scotland. Number 11, the brother battle. Cromwell's brother battle of Campbell's motif is between himself and his own ruler. Cromwell wanted to obey his king, but when he saw that he could not do this in good conscience, he was compelled to aid in the execution of his ruler. Number 12. Night or sea journey. Where did this hero's journeys take him? Cromwell's hero actions took him from his quiet country farm to the busy city of London, and finally to being ruler of his country. Number 13. Dragon battle. Cromwell's dragon battle, or fight with an inner demon, was his constant battle with sin. As a Christian, Cromwell understood himself to be a sinner, and since he was fighting for God, his battle against sin and the devil was constant. Number 14. Sacred marriage. Joseph Campbell says that every hero has something called a sacred marriage, or a special emotional bond. In Cromwell's case, it was his relationship with God. Number 15. Entering the belly of the whale. When did Cromwell face his darkest fear? Cromwell's darkest fear was the destruction of the Protestant Church and the reign of tyranny of King Charles, and this nearly happened. Before the Civil War even began, Cromwell and his friends in Parliament received word that 50,000 to 200,000 Irish Protestants had been killed for their faith, and that the king was most likely involved. This was the culmination of their worst fears. Number 16. Apotheosis, or deification. Cromwell's deification happened when the people wanted to make him their king. Cromwell refused. Number 17. Ultimate boon, or magic elixir. When Cromwell became Lord Protector of England, he established religious freedom. This is what he had been fighting for. He had been fighting against tyranny and persecution, so he granted freedom. Number 18. Master of two worlds. Cromwell fought for both physical and spiritual freedom, and he accomplished both. Number 19. Freedom to live. Oliver Cromwell fought for truly the freedom to live. He fought for the rights of his fellow countrymen, and that was his only purpose as a ruler. He said, "I desire not to keep my place in this government an hour longer than I may preserve England in its just rights, and may protect the people of God in such a just liberty of their consciences." He only wanted to be the ruler as long as what he was doing was keeping his fellow English countrymen in their freedom. Number 20. Magic flight or pursuit. After Cromwell's death, his son tried to take his place, but he was not equal to his father. The royalists came back into power and put Charles I's son back on the throne. Their hatred for Cromwell was so great that they had his body dug up, put on trial, and then publicly executed. So there, that was 20 points. Many people in Cromwell's time and today regard him as a cruel tyrant who only fought under religious pretenses to further his own plans. I don't think that could be farther from the truth. I think Oliver Cromwell was one of the most godly men of all time.